Welcome to my channel, everyone. I'm Serena for those of you that are new here, and today I want to talk to you about Insatiable, which came out a while ago, but it's one of those shows where I wanted to do a deep dive because I haven't noticed many other YouTube channels actually diving properly into this show, not just talking about the finale or maybe the characters, but everything overall. And a lot of people actually stopped watching at the first season or after the first few episodes, so I wanted to give my thoughts, also because they're a little bit different to what you might expect, to what the mainstream was saying, to what people on social media were saying, because I know a lot of people really didn't like this show. But before we get into it, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and then all, so you get all notifications and you never miss another video from me. And actually, I've noticed a lot of you guys aren't subscribed, because I can see on my analytics that like 70% of my audience watches my videos but aren't subscribed. So hi, please subscribe. I would love to have you, and I would love to see you join the family and interact with everyone in the comments, and it would just be so great to have you here. So let's get into it. Let's talk about this show. Insatiable is an American dark comedy drama series centering on a girl called Patty, who used to be a plus-sized girl until she was punched in the face and had to go on a liquid diet for 3 months and lost loads of weight. And then everyone started treating her differently, even though when she was fat, she was bullied really badly over her weight and excluded, didn't have a whole lot of friends. And she noticed a change, obviously, when she lost a whole lot of weight. And the beginning of the show frames it as a story of a girl who wants to seek revenge on the people who hurt her. There's this guy called Bob who does beauty pageants, and he ends up meeting Patty and then seeing loads of potential in her to become a beauty queen, especially because he's been a bit disgraced in his profession. So he focuses on coaching her. But today I wanted to talk about problems with the show, and that includes the romances, the characters, the degradation of Patty's character, or whether it's actually a good thing, because I have very mixed feelings about the show and I can see both sides of the spectrum. So what I liked: anything to do with beauty pageants, I'm going to be completely fascinated. It's a yes from me. I love beauty pageants. I don't know what it is, but in a TV show, there are so many different dynamics that can take place involving beauty pageants, the competition, the rivalry, the outfits, the training for it and preparation. I love it. So it's one of the reasons I was intrigued by the show. And I know a lot of people were saying, well, I wouldn't have taken that direction with the show, but I actually like the idea because so much of this show is centered around beauty standards. It kind of makes sense there'd be this focus on pageants, and there's a lot of potential there. So that was off to a pretty cool start. And I also found the body image concept interesting, which is one of the reasons I wanted to watch the show. And I actually do feel that the show had a lot of very interesting messages and some really heartfelt or insightful commentary to be making, maybe, and some critique. But the way it goes about it isn't very good sometimes, or they do have some good ideas, but somehow the actual execution and their approach to those ideas made a lot of people quite angry, and a lot of people were saying it was insensitive. So many people were so harsh on this show, calling it absolute garbage, trash, when I've seen movies that are just horrific in every sense and are boring and slow paced, and this show does have a lot going for it. So I was thinking, am I crazy here? Why are people being so critical? Now, this show has a lot of problems I'm going to get into, like a lot, but it's not as bad as people make out. I've watched the show twice now, so it's really gripping, really addictive, very binge worthy. It really takes in the audience. So much happens, and I do, to be fair, I'm going to talk about good stuff and bad stuff, but I do think a lot of people came into it expecting it to be a certain type of thing, and then were surprised when it wasn't what they expected, or maybe they don't really understand dark comedy and the show intentionally being crazy and over the top, because a lot of people were saying, but I don't understand this show. Is it meant to be funny? Because it's not funny. The humor's weird and they're being insensitive. But I found not everything, but quite a lot of stuff to do with the show very funny, and I was laughing at multiple points while watching it. And maybe that's just my sense of humor, because I do have an unusual sense of humor, but it really wasn't that bad in a lot of aspects. Even if the point of the show wasn't executed the best or done very well, the impression I got from it, if there is any message, is that being skinny or being conventionally attractive doesn't automatically make your life better or improve your emotional issues in any way or just fix you. Some of the stuff was so crazy. There was no way they didn't realize how crazy it was. It was done intentionally for a reason, maybe to be a bit controversial, to be intriguing and a bit outlandish. At one point, Patty goes to kidnap a contestant in this pageant dressed as a wiener hot dog. Like, come on, that wasn't an accident on the creator's part. It was meant to be ridiculous, and a lot of the lines in this are ridiculous. A lot of the characters are like cartoons, and also people were saying none of the characters are likable. I don't know why we think all the characters need to be likable all the time. Every single character has issues in this show. Every character makes mistakes. Some of them get worse as it progresses. And again, I don't think that was some kind of whoopsie mistake on the writer's part. You may not like it, but it is what it is. The show was intentionally doing that. And that's the main thing, is that it's self-aware, and it was. However, again, I will say that just because you can say, well, the writers are self-aware, it doesn't mean that it takes away the responsibility the writers have to do a good job, because in many instances the show was being self-aware and knew it was crazy, but stuff wasn't done in a very good way, and that is a problem. And if you say, oh, it's stupid, it's trashy because it's supposed to be stupid, it's satire, that's not actually an excuse for bad writing, because at multiple points the plot was all over the place, or there were just unresolved things that didn't quite make sense, that were just a bit tacky. So even though it's aware that it's comical or it's crazy, that doesn't actually absolve it of the responsibility to make stuff make sense. One of the reasons I like it maybe is because I see the potential with the show, or what could be, rather than what it actually is, because with better, I don't know, directors, showrunners, the show could have made a lot more sense, because the ideas are there, but it's just not pulled off or hitting the mark in the best way. For example, the show talks about beauty standards put on girls and how crazy they are and how difficult they are to achieve in so many aspects. It's insane how unattainable they are. Rather than like critiquing it or having a clear opinion, rather than the show knowing what its view was on these issues and an angle it was taking, and that's the point of satire, right? Is you're making fun of stuff because you have a viewpoint on it. It was more like they were just showing these issues, showing Patty's really toxic viewpoints towards her own body and towards eating, but there wasn't really then a point, like a conclusion the show was drawing. Overall, it was like the show wasn't sure which direction to take. It was just trying to keep you hooked in a very soap opera, reality TV style type way, rather than actually focusing maybe on developing pre-existing relationships and making stuff make sense. Instead, it was just looking for some crazy drama, even if that wasn't necessarily true to the characters. So that's a problem as well. But let's just talk about it. Let's talk about the characters first of all. Patty, she's the main character. She is not likable at all, but the actress gives her so much charm. It's hard not to like her. Even when she's doing the wrong thing, you're kind of like, wow, that was really impressive. So good job to her. She's always trying to push any responsibility away from herself, and that's very cleverly done because it's very true to life, and so many people are like that. And she's always looking for an external thing to fix her unhappiness, and the show makes it very explicit. They're aware and conscious this is a problem she has, because it's in her narration too, where she's saying, wow, I thought he could fix me, and then I thought he could fix me, and I just want someone to love me. And when you look at her abandonment issues from her dad and her mum, you can see it coming through in a really not beautiful, it's not beautiful, but in a very true to life way that so many people could definitely connect to, especially including her love interests and the way she treats them. She's having these mood swings back and forth, that she's hating someone and then she's loving them. And I was like, wait, where are we supposed to stand with this though? This is weird. It's funny because in some ways Patty is a very cleverly crafted character. For instance, with her teratoma, she's focusing on that, thinking there's a demon inside of me trying to take over my body, or there's this teratoma which is controlling what I'm doing, as a way to pretend that something else is causing and making her bad decisions because she doesn't want to admit the blame's entirely on her and it's completely her fault, which I again think is very clever. But the show was quite inconsistent with its creation, because at other points I was like, no, this is just objectively bad writing and is not very well done. She could seem so obsessed with someone and then be grossed out by them and be like, oh, that was a mistake, and not even have any feelings towards them anymore, and then suddenly she's obsessed with them again and she's jumping between guys in a way that I'm like, please pick a guy to like. It doesn't make any sense. And it's not like, oh, that's naturally who she is. It was like whenever the plot needed her to like a certain guy to push the story forward, she would, even if it wasn't character driven and wasn't honest and organic with what we know about Patty and who she is. I understand why she would like Brick in some ways, but her affection for Christian made purely no sense, because we know she's a resentful person and she holds grudges and she's bitter. But yet when it came to Christian, even though he'd screwed her over multiple times or made her feel bad about herself, she was really invested in him at multiple points and wanting to go back to him, to the point that she was choosing him over Brick. And she was treated like a prop or an object, rather than, okay, what's the most organic, realistic decision that Patty would make in this moment, considering what we know about her. The past self of Patty is sometimes contrasted to her present self, or similarities are drawn, like, oh, you were always selfish when you were fat and you're still selfish now. But it's really hard for us to be emotionally hit by this or impacted by this when we really have no insight into what Patty's personality was like before the weight loss contrasted to now. So is she actually really similar? Has she changed a lot? Because we saw a few brief flashbacks, but they didn't really show a whole lot about who she was, which is really strange. And also we're meant to think, oh, this is a bullying story. And so many people were saying, oh, the only reason you don't like Insatiable is because you've never been bullied, and it's a story that appeals to victims of bullying. But I mean, I've been excluded, not bullied, but I've been excluded before in the past and treated badly by people and, you know, made to feel not welcome multiple points, because I went to a whole bunch of different schools and I had many of those experiences. But I didn't particularly relate to Patty or feel like, oh, poor thing, because a lot of the bullying was depicted in a very comic, over-the-top, funny way, or you didn't see much of it, like the psychological impact it had on Patty, particularly in that moment. And it was more like, oh, I'm so sad, someone was mean to me today, and people making a few fat jokes maybe, but not really as much as you would think if this is really meant to be an insight into maybe being bullied or losing friends or feeling excluded. Additionally, it sends the message that now, as a thin girl, her story is worth focusing on, and it's worth showing how she's struggling with her body image now, but it's not worth focusing on her experiences as a plus-sized girl and what that was like for her at the time, because we're not actually seeing lots of flashbacks to, you know, how she was dealing with it and the effect it was having on her, if she was skipping school maybe, or the humiliation she felt, because instead we're mostly seeing, well, how she's dealing with it in the present day and how her body image is now. But considering this is meant to be a story that's, I guess, positivity for people of all shapes and sizes, and, you know, showing everyone needs love and everyone deserves love, we're not actually seeing enough of her past self, and that's just an opinion I have. But I want to talk about more actual problems with her character where I'm like, I feel like this could have used some more work, such as the fact that Patty keeps making the same mistakes over and over again, or getting worse and worse, rather than realizing, oh, I messed up last time, so I'm going to learn and adjust that. And to be fair, they do sort of redeem that, because at the end they just consciously and deliberately take her down a very dark path where she gets worse and worse and worse, going down a spiral. But it was still a bit annoying when she kept screwing up and making the same poor decisions. And rather than showing her good sides to make her more of a multi-dimensional character or a morally grey character, instead they barely show those good sides, and instead have bad things happen to her and misfortune placed upon her to make us root for her. And I did genuinely fall for it a few times. I was like, oh my god, that's so sad, until I reevaluated and I was like, wait, you're just putting hardship on her. Like, her mum was constantly abandoning her, so whenever Patty had done really bad stuff, pretty soon after, her mum would screw her over in some way to make you forget about the bad stuff Patty had done and instead feel bad for her. Or it was like she was just starting to bond with Coralee, and you can see Patty has mum issues, so she needs a motherly figure, and then Coralee was like, no, I'm going to basically backstab backstab you and go and hang out with some other women, and that was the end of it. And why? Because then Patty is obviously feeling so rejected by that, so devastated, and we forget that Patty should still be held accountable for her previous bad actions. Coralee has issues, but in that scene with Patty, she was being properly mean, a proper high school bully in some senses, even though she's a grown woman, which wasn't fully true to what I knew about Coralee because the nasty streak was so intense in that scene, and it didn't make sense either. It was a proper dumb jump in order to shock the audience rather than make sense, because earlier they were doing this mother-daughter pageant thing together and really bonding, almost as if they were mother and daughter, and Coralee was being really nice to her, and then suddenly she turned into a massive cow and flipped out on Patty just when they needed Patty to look good, which I didn't like. I would much rather Coralee had stayed nice to Patty, because at the time as they were bonding, Patty was thinking about destroying Bob's marriage and Coralee's marriage with Bob. And then when Coralee started being nice to her, it was amazing because it really brought some dramatic tension, because Patty was then having this crisis thinking, wait, maybe I don't want to ruin their marriage because Coralee's actually being really nice to me. So then if she was going to still destroy their marriage, she'd have this proper guilty conscience about this. Like, is this the right thing to do? I feel bad about it. But instead, when they basically turn Coralee into this bad guy, there's no reason for us to be angry at Patty for doing the wrong thing, because she can make a totally guilt-free decision. Because why should we care if Coralee's marriage gets destroyed? Coralee is clearly a shallow bitch, so that's the end of it. And that's annoying, because then you can't actually hold Patty accountable as a character for her actions and put her in a position where she's really feeling bad about this decision she might make and second guessing whether it's a good idea or not. I would have loved to see her get cold feet and not go through with being a cow, because it would show growth from her. And at one point, Patty pulls the wheelchair out from under Dixie because she believes Dixie is faking a disability. This was a terrible idea because she didn't have proof, and that sends a really weird message, like pull a wheelchair out from someone who might be disabled. That's so messed up, but okay, she does it, and Dixie falls to the ground and is really upset, and the scene almost frames it as if, of course, Patty's done the wrong thing, but we should feel bad for her because it's so humiliating for her with everyone judging her. And also, she'd said in that moment, okay, you're all feeling bad for Dixie, blah, 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 and wanting to be there for her, but what about the times when I was being so severely bullied and none of you were there for me or supporting me? So you understand why she's angry, and then you almost are like, oh, well, fair enough, she is right to try and hurt Dixie. But anyway, even if Patty has to actually process that and apologize and grow, she doesn't need to grow, and that opportunity is taken away from her, because then we find out later Dixie at some point was faking not being able to walk and she could walk just fine, which frames Dixie as the bad guy and Patty as someone who was actually right all along. Finally, another thing I thought was a little bit odd about Patty is she has this huge opportunity to win this beauty pageant and prove everyone wrong who's bullied her, and since it's framed as her wanting revenge or being resentful towards people who bullied her, I would think that she'd put her heart and soul into this pageant and really concentrate. But a lot of the time it's like she wasn't particularly bothered about it, or if she was, it was always kind of the second thing she thought about. It wasn't in her list of priorities because she was off doing other things, or she just wasn't really putting her head down and focusing on it, which I found strange considering what we know about her character. And later we'll talk about her downward spiral and whether it was actually really good because it was intentional and blah blah blah, or whether it was just her becoming unlikable and a cow and how dare she and how dare the writers, and that's it. So I will talk about that later when I talk about the plot. But now let's talk about Brick. He's Patty's main love interest, and initially he's only interested in her when she loses the weight, and I have different thoughts about this. The first one being, if he wasn't attracted to her before, he shouldn't have had to try and convince himself he liked her, or want to date her if he just didn't find her attractive. That's fine, but at the same time it kind of sends an icky message that our main love interest for her, portrayed as quite a nice guy, only liked her when she physically appealed to him. But it's not even like before he was her friend. He wasn't even her friend. I mean, when he rejected her, he was quite cutthroat about it. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Also, who chose his name? We need to talk. It's such a bad name. Who calls a love interest Brick? That's not even a name, but okay. And one of the most unexpected revelations was that he'd been having an affair with Regina, who's this much older woman in like her 40s, and Brick's a 16-year-old. And this is a weird part of the show where it's not even like it's satire or it's crazy, it's edgy, it's shocking. It was just unnecessary and definitely should have been cut out because it didn't contribute anything. And even though other people intervened and were shocked about this relationship, Brick himself doesn't seem to fully internalize that this relationship was really unhealthy and that she was being really predatory, which I didn't like. I know in real life sometimes kids don't realize until like in their 30s that this bad thing had happened to them and why it was bad, but still, it's odd when throughout the series he's not seeming that bothered or traumatized by that experience, and it probably would have sent a really good message if he was actually like, wow, that was so bad and thank God my parents intervened and blah blah blah. At points he is just being a dumb teenager, as teenagers are, and what person's mature at 15, 16? No one. However, at points he was just a bad love interest and plain mean. Patty was clearly feeling insecure in her body, and then he made it a whole lot worse because he cheated on her that same night with Magnolia of all people and kissed her rather than actually talking to Patty and ending the relationship or working through the issues they had. Getting back together with Magnolia was annoying because it was such a huge step back with his character and such a huge regression. Patty feels that Brick likes the person she wants to be, and Christian, her nasty love interest, likes the person she is now, and that's not necessarily a good thing because she doesn't love the person she is now. And to be fair, on Brick's part, he did often see the good in Patty and not put her on a pedestal, but he was like, wow, Patty's a really cool girl, so he was probably a better influence to be around, and I would rather he was with her any day. And Debby Ryan, who plays Patty, even said there were so many healthy things in her life that she wasn't attracted to and let slip away. And I do feel like Brick was one of those people. Patty was almost repelled by the fact that he was a lot healthier, and it would be great if there was a third season, which there won't be, but to see her actually maybe go back to him or go to someone better rather than someone like Christian. But now let's talk about Bob. He's Patty's coach for pageant stuff, and when Patty first meets him, she thinks of him as kind of a kindred spirit, like someone who's meant to be in her life and someone she's always drawn back to and someone who's just really special. He was accused of something he didn't do by Regina, which was touching her daughter inappropriately, who's obviously a 16-year-old and he's a grown man. But I don't like that the show focuses on making him likable through him being falsely accused of something, because in real life 99% of the time the people who say that something bad happened to them like that are telling the truth. I also don't like that Patty takes such a huge romantic interest in him in the beginning. Nonnie says, why do you like him? He's an accused child molester. And Patty says, that might mean I have a shot, which was meant to be dark humor, but it was uncomfortable to watch and you just want to turn it off. You're like, ew, who wrote this? This is going way too far. And I don't like how the audience is then meant to be not rooting for, but curious for this, oh, I wonder if they'll get together or not, and watching for all the signs whether he'll date her or not, because for a few episodes you're thinking, will he date her? Will he not date her? And that's again unnecessary, and that whole storyline is dragged out for way too long and it's way too creepy. Additionally, Bob is quite unlikable at points. First of all, I don't like that Bob's getting Patty into this pageant stuff, because he should know how insecure she is and how much of a toxic environment that would be, and the last thing she needs is to be going into a competition based on judging girls and comparing them based on their beauty, and so much focus on physical appearance and keeping skinny beforehand and makeovers. So that was a bit selfish on his part, but he is shown to be selfish throughout at multiple points and not being there for her when he needs to be. And at other points he is nice and he is likable. He's a bit of a mixed bag. But to make things up to Dixie, who Patty had hurt, and to keep Patty from being suspended, Bob suggests throwing Patty a roast, and it's for her 18th birthday as well. So that's just, or is it her 17th? I don't know, but for her birthday, which is not the sort of thing anyone wants to do for a special occasion at all. But it involves basically her needing to just sit there and take it while people throw insults at her, even though he should know that people won't do it in a fun way. The insults will actually be quite aggressive and definitely masking some actual problems they have with Patty, and maybe mean backhanded insults. So he should know that, and I didn't like that it was like, oh, this is going to be so funny, and Patty just has to go along with it, especially because these classmates were the ones who used to tease her and isolate her around the way she looked, so that would just not be fun. I mean, I actually like where the show goes with exploring his sexuality, but I'm not a fan of the fact that he does become like that in some ways. I don't know, it's just the fact that he had this interest interest in makeovers and beauty pageants and feminine stuff, and I was so interested in the fact that he was a straight man and liked that stuff because it sends such a positive message. But then later on you find out I think he's bisexual, so it was like, oh. I will say some of my favorite scenes are when he's interacting with Barnard or the other Bob. The fact they have the same name is hilarious, and a lot of their scenes are genuinely funny, especially when they're compared or when Bob is thinking of all these nicknames for the other Bob, having this monologue of how much he hates him, because as we find out later that's actually not the case at all. The Coralee, Bob and Barnard / Bob love triangle was handled in a very messy and confusing way because of its lack of resolution and it making sense or tying together at the end. So we know that Bob has always resented Barnard or Bob because he feels inferior to him, he's jealous, they're competitors, but then it ties into a trope I absolutely love, which is friends to enemies to lovers. You know, they were friends when they were younger, and he actually has so much hurt over this and so much resentment over how it ended and how Barnard pulled away from him, and when they were around 14, and then they became enemies and had lots of arguments, but it's actually because they're secretly in love with each other. Barnard pulled away because he didn't know how to conceptualize or understand his feelings, which I love. I love that idea of them getting together, and I'm such a huge fan of that trope in movies and in literature. However, they did jump too quickly from arguments, resentment to suddenly getting together, and I would have preferred more of an in-between stage where they were like, hey, what is this? Why am I having feelings for this person? Because one minute it was like, we don't like each other, I'm jealous of you, and then it was them kissing. Bob is then quite confused about his sexuality because he loves his wife, but he also loves Bob, so he's thinking, what am I? Like, what is this feeling I'm experiencing? Then he's wanting to enter into a relationship with both of them because he likes them both, and he wants to have his cake and eat it too in some senses, because Coralee is not happy with doing it with both of them, and there's a point where she's like, no, make a decision, me or him. I don't want to be doing this juggling both of us thing. But for Bob, he's like, maybe I'd be happy to have a relationship with two people, and he explores that later on. And I do like that the show creates a dialogue around these kinds of relationships, because some people have those kinds of relationships. Not everyone's just with one person the whole time. I was waiting for Bob to finally be done with Coralee, but instead it takes this nasty dark turn I didn't like, where suddenly he and Bob are back to square one of having fights and having real problems with each other. And what I don't like about that is we've already done that before, and it's such a regression to go back to we actually hate each other now more than ever, and I wanted them to move on from that stage of their life and actually end up together, but instead they don't end up together. They're separate at the end, and I was just not a fan of that, because it's like, what was the point of that then if we're not even going to get Barnard as a love interest? And what really pissed me off, he takes this romantic interest in Patty's mum, which was so forced and not genuine, and they're there having this relationship like, oh, we'll end up together, even though in the first season there were no signs they'd like each other. Something about that bothered me, and I don't know what it was. He had so much more chemistry with Bob than he ever did with Coralee, so much more passion, so I could see him being in a more fulfilling relationship with Bob. Now let's talk about Coralee. In the beginning, she's struggling to be independent in some senses, so I actually really liked where she started her own tampon business, which was a little funny and weird and nonsensical, but in some ways I was like, yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense, and it's cool to see her separate from Bob and go and do her own thing. However, her and Bob were both terribly neglectful parents to Brick, and in the beginning it's quite unexpected because she actually likes the Bob next door, Barnard. Not even that much of an emotional thing, but she just seems really invested in his life and the fantasy of being with him and his perfect, I mean, it's everything. It's his status, it's the way he carries himself, it's his perfect family, it's his lovely house, it's his money. She feels like he could give her stuff that her current husband and her house and her life couldn't give her, because she is presented as a social climber and wanting to just weasel herself into their lives, but Bob seems to have no interest in her. What really bothered me and confused me is then at one point she actually ends up kissing Bob and then says, I wanted to do that for a long time, and he's like, yeah, me too, and seems shocked by the fact that, wow, he actually did want to kiss her, which made truly no sense when you look at their relationship, and he never had any interest in her. Why would he want to kiss her? And later on they're bonding and chatting, and you get the feeling, oh my gosh, they're actually going to hook up. Do they hook up again? I think they do. Do they kiss? Something happens where they're one-on-one talking and flirting, and I was like, no, I'm not here for it. He never seemed interested in her in the beginning. He barely seemed to notice her, so why now? Let's talk about Nonnie. Nonnie is Patty's best friend and ends up struggling with her sexuality, and it's really interesting because it's actually one of the better arcs in the show, but she's almost too heartfelt for a show like this because everyone else is so crazy and she's just so genuine and like emotional in every scene she's in. But anyway, she likes Patty, but unfortunately it ties into the predatory lesbian trope. I'm all for her feelings for Patty being done in a comical way like everything else in this show, like, oh, I have a crush on Patty, seeing it, but her not truly understanding her own feelings and it being a bit of a joke, because that's quite funny and ties into what the rest of the show is about, which is comedy. But what I didn't like is how predatory and creepy and possessive and controlling she came across at points, and it was bordering on sexual assault, to be honest, the way she'd like be flirting with her and touching her when clearly Patty was not giving out the same vibes and picking up what Nonnie was putting down. Also, is she dumb? Because Patty was giving no signals she was interested, and Nonnie seems like a pretty smart, perceptive girl. So it was odd how oblivious she was to Patty's feelings, to the point that she kisses her. It's like, girl, are you actually stupid? Patty clearly has no interest, so why are you pushing it? And it really bugged me, as again, they have this roast/insult activity for Patty's birthday. People can tease her or say what they want to say to raise money for Dixie to have a new wheelchair. And I like the idea of Nonnie setting boundaries with Patty, because she does that at multiple points. Like, no, Patty, I said I want space, so I'll call the shots for when I'm ready to go back to you. And I really liked those aspects because it was healthy and mature and just really cool, and she does that multiple points. But what I didn't like is that at this birthday party, which is obviously Patty's special day, to be fair, everyone had already been mean to Patty. It was just enough, and Nonnie should have sensed that. But as she's giving her insult session, she then starts realizing how much she actually dislikes Patty in some ways and how much Patty has been a terrible friend. So keep it to yourself and talk to Patty privately about it, right? But instead, she goes on this rant listing off all the bad things Patty's done to her, having this moment of realization about their friendship, which I thought was really mean-spirited, considering they will judge Patty so hard and think she's an awful person, and you're going to turn people against her. So why are you doing that? That's just mean. Now let's talk about the plot progression, storylines, and Patty's spiral. So the evolution with Patty's mum, first of all, is really interesting throughout the show, and it's a thing that is a bit back and forth. At points she seems like she's really trying to be a good mum, but then she's abandoning Patty and disappearing on her for days. A great character, because she's so true to so many parents who only want to be a part-time parent, and they're not prepared for the commitment and responsibility of being a parent, because they're in some ways very selfish and have a bit of a consumerist identity, where they want to go and do their own thing and not fully focus on their child. But at the same time, they sort of know it's wrong, so they feel guilty, and then they come crawling back like, I'm sorry, I know I've not been the best mum, but I'm here now, aren't I? But then they can't fully commit to being a parent. So she was really well crafted, also because you could see that underneath she does genuinely care about Patty, but she's not the best at verbalizing it or knowing the right thing to say. And what I love is it gives you an idea of where Patty's ED may have come from, because you can see that she has these real insecurities and abandonment issues, because she never knew what unconditional, committed, I'm here for you kind of relationships were like, because she did not get that with her dad or with her mum. And I appreciate the show for giving us some context into why Patty is the way she is. Additionally, Bob's wife Coralee is so fascinating as a character. I think she's so interesting because she's not fully good, but not fully bad either. And I love her rags to riches story, her social climbing storyline. Again, so many people are like that in real life. Another storyline I loved was anything to do with Stella Rose. She resents Bob because he rejected her. She's a scorned lover and trying to take him down, and she's a competitor in the beauty pageant sphere, and I loved that. Patty breaks up Coralee and Bob's marriage by revealing that Bob had cheated on Coralee, which I really did not like, because it made Patty so unlikable, and it shows that she's addicted to havoc in general, not just getting revenge on the people who hurt her. She's just a bully, and at some points it wasn't like the show was just showing her maybe systematically taking down the people who hurt her. You can see how unlikable Patty is because of how self-absorbed she is. I'm not saying she's a terrible character, but in some ways she is, because she's just so painfully self-absorbed. Like, Nonnie's coming out and Patty is just not there for her. She's making it all about herself rather than stopping and listening. And a lot of the show shows her downward spiral, such as wanting to get revenge on this homeless guy, and she wishes he would die. Then he does, and she realizes she's happy about it. I don't like the supernatural turn the show took. I thought it was a little bit silly at points with the whole, am I possessed? Is something taking over my body? And then this whole exorcism thing and a Ouija board. I don't know how to say that but that whole board they used to talk to people in the afterlife, and then the homeless man talking to them from the grave. It's like the show was losing its sense of direction a bit and losing its course because this was a little bit too crazy. Patty is annoyed that Bob kept being gay from her, and she's annoyed about how her whole awful birthday party went down with people insulting her, so she chooses to expose the fact that Bob has been cheating on Coralee with a guy in front of everyone at this party, which was definitely Patty being the antagonist, the villain. That was it. She was no longer the main character who's misunderstood. She was being awful because he was not ready to come out. He was going to do it on his own terms, and he is the one person that has always been there for her. Even when he had some mistakes, he still does care about her and has supported her and seen her potential and given her some opportunities with the pageant stuff. So not only is she being so ungrateful here, but this really frames her as the bully, a serious bully. And then at the same party, it's revealed Dixie isn't actually in a wheelchair, and at some point she recovered. And Patty's like, see, everyone's a liar here except me. So she always has to have the last word. She always has to prove that she's on the moral high ground. However, clearly the show has some self-awareness, because later Patty has these thoughts around the fact that she's not a great person, she's self-destructive, she's got some issues, and then she goes and, it's quite sad actually, just eats this cake and binge eats, and you can see how devastated she is, and she's looking for an escape because she feels so awful about herself and she has some self-loathing. I'm also hesitant to judge the show in some aspects because the show wasn't renewed for a third or fourth season, and maybe if it had been, it would have actually depicted her as growing and learning, but they didn't get the chance to do that because maybe they had this master plan for her redemption arc, but they didn't get the chance because they didn't have the seasons renewed. So in some senses, I'm hesitant to judge. But then Patty again really morally just takes another downturn where she decides to kidnap another contestant in the pageant to make herself look better. So she dresses up as a hot dog, and it's so funny. I found it hilarious. She then gets a call from Brick, who was saying that he was actually at this Drew Barrymore book signing with some of her friends, and because Patty is so focused on hurting other people, she hadn't turned up, which was again me thinking, wow, am I really meant to be supporting this character and wanting the best for her and rooting for her when she's ditching her friends? Like, why can't she just go and do normal teenage stuff and hang out with her friends? Why does she need to be so mean all the time and just wasting her life and focused and wrapped up in so much negativity? But then she ends up getting kidnapped herself, and the irony of that is hilarious because then she has to try and escape. It's kind of funny too, we're meant to feel all bad for her being kidnapped now and put in this situation when she was going to do the exact same thing to someone else. Stella Rose has kidnapped her and says, "You'll always be Fatty Patty, that's your legacy." And Patty realizes that this story she has as the fat girl is just a story, and people can call her that, but she can change it and change that label at any point. It only has power if she actually chooses to believe in it and agree with it. And she's like, wait, I don't need to be Fatty Patty, I can be anyone. She thinks she's killed Stella. Luckily, not luckily, but Stella's not actually dead. Luckily for Stella, but not so luckily for Patty because Stella wants revenge on her. Patty kills Christian. Basically, he'd kidnapped a contestant to try and help Patty, and he thought it was a good thing and should be proud of him because she's evil like him. And he says she's the bad guy and she's a bad person like him, and it's a good thing. But she's really triggered by this, and so she kills him while she's saying, I'm a good person, I'm a good person. And you can see again her just struggling to accept the fact that maybe she's actually a bad person. So she's killed someone now and has to try and cover it up with Bob. And season 2 takes an interesting shift again because there's lots of murder. Actually, someone's killing off the pageant girls. They're like the pageant killer one by one, and it's a real problem. They're trying to figure out who it is, so it turns into a bit of a whodunit murder mystery unexpectedly. Anyway, there's more verbalizing around the fact that Patty actually has an ED because she has to actually get help, and she actually is denying it for a while, saying I don't have an ED. So you can see the show's actually trying to call out the fact that she has one, because earlier you knew she had loads of problems, but it was never really verbally stating or addressing this is not normal, like she needs help with this. And Patty finds out that Gordy sexually abused her mother when she was underage, and she thinks he's her dad. I don't think he actually is. I think he lied to her. But anyway, she shoves him and kills him, and I think that was intentional because she knew if he fell, he would die, right? Or at least get really badly hurt. And she kills other people too, people who were trying to harm her mum. So she's becoming a bit of a serial killer by this point. And then her kidnapper Stella Rose returns and attacks her. And so Patty kills her in self-defense. So that's like 6 people she's killed now. And then, to be fair, it was kind of funny, which is bad, but also very stressful to watch, of her keeping Stella Rose's body in a suitcase and thinking, where will I dispose of it? How will I get rid of it? And then Bob realizes that Patty actually enjoyed killing, and it wasn't fully due to the circumstances. She was actually liking it. And it ends with her thinking she needs to go off and kill someone else who's trying to hurt Bob. So she's actually maybe doing it because, oh, I have to, but she actually enjoys it. And I liked it in the sense that because Patty was such a bad person, at least they're committing to it. They're going all the way with it, and they're actually making her a properly bad person doing really bad things, rather than trying to sell her as like this good person. They're clearly owning the facts that no, she's not a good person. But she killed Christian because he was triggering her, saying she was a bad person, which was pushing her past her breaking point, and because he'd kidnapped Magnolia and hit her over the head, and Patty was furious with him about it. So it wasn't fully like she just decided to kill him, and he'd been stalking her and really creeping her out, so I get why she'd be seriously uncomfortable, because he'd been following her. And then with Stella Rose, it was self-defense, and she killed those drug dealers because they were trying to hurt her mother, and they were really scary guys. No, that's so cute. Because so often women are expected to just smile, never be mean, and never hurt anyone, but it's okay if male characters do that and they're not judged as harshly. So it was nice to see for once a female being unapologetically mean and selfish and unlikable, and I was a big fan of that because we don't always see enough of it.
I was like looking at photos of crime scenes and reading interviews with lady killers. I think there is a difference in how women deal with rage and anger and how a woman would maybe approach killing someone, especially someone who is typically as impulsive and compulsive as Patty. So I was looking for that and crimes of passion. When you do something like that, it makes you then a liar. You have to hide, you have to cover up. And so I also studied that. I studied the psychology of it. I, rewatched Dexter. These were all interesting because she doesn't have a method. And typically with a serial killer, there is one particular method. And each one of these was kind of circumstantial and how she could use what happened in the moment.
I wasn't a big fan, though, to be fair, of this shift in genre in the last 2 seasons where it suddenly became all dark, because it was just a bit all over the place. Again, like the show wasn't quite sure the message it was sending, or just choosing something and sticking with it. It's like when I started my YouTube channel, I had no idea what my niche would be, so I kept jumping between topics. I was doing like my climate change environmental videos, and then I was doing some get ready with me's, and then I was doing dating advice. It's actually a joke. I deleted some of those videos, but the evolution of my channel was hilarious. And then when that wasn't really working and I wasn't vibing with it, I did more sort of commentary about YouTubers and celebrities, and then I was like, nah, I'm not really fully enjoying it all the time, and then I moved into movie reviews. And it's like the show's doing this, but it doesn't work in a TV show. You can't keep jumping, because at the beginning it's like this comedic teen drama, dark humor about a revenge story, and then it's like this supernatural spooky edge, and then it's like a whodunit thriller. And the show really needed to figure out what direction they were taking. Halfway through season 2, suddenly it was like, oh, we're doing this now, even though they weren't doing that from the beginning. Lauren Guzis, I don't know how to say her name, but she played a really big part in creating Insatiable, and she's a television writer and producer. She, growing up, really struggled with binge eating, and she said, I was bullied when I was a teenager, my friends dumped me, I felt alone without the protection of friends or being one of the popular girls. So that makes me view the show in a different way, because even though the delivery isn't always the best, but clearly she personally is connected to the topic and is writing it from her heart. So I sort of felt bad that people were criticizing the show, because even though the criticism is totally valid, I did kind of feel bad because she obviously put her heart and soul into the work and thought it was really good and really thought-provoking, so that does suck. And she said the punchlines might make some audience members uncomfortable. I'm used to laughter alchemizing the problem. In terms of making this a comedy, I think it was the only way for me to do it. Now I want to talk about lack of subtext or subtlety. And I know the show is meant to be big and exaggerated and spelling everything out and over the top, but it was kind of annoying at points because the voiceovers are some of the most annoying parts of this show. It was like that in Revenge 2 again, actually, where the voiceovers were really good in the beginning, but they got really annoying by the end, and it was just way too much. It was really irritating. I would rather the voiceovers were just at the beginning or at the end of the movie or the show, because when it's every episode with all these different characters like Coralee doing it and Bob, it's like, why are we doing this? And they were spelling out stuff we already knew, like so-and-so died and I was happy about it, and oh, I liked him, but now I wasn't sure I liked him anymore because I was really attracted to Christian. And it's like, we know this. We should be able to tell this from the actors acting, and if they were actually good at their job and the music was good, the acting was good, the cinematography was good, the lighting was good, we should be able to infer a lot about the mood, the tone, the characters' feelings, and constantly narrating and spelling out really obvious stuff makes me as an audience member feel like I'm stupid, and it really takes me out of the scene because I'm having everything told to me. Maybe at the beginning the voiceovers were necessary because we still weren't quite sure where the characters were at, or maybe in tricky points where stuff is a bit complicated and it needs explaining, but at other points it's like, we really don't need a narration here. It's really obvious what's going on, who's feeling what's about to happen, so I don't need everything spelled out. Now I want to talk about some problematic aspects with the show. Hot Bob, as he's called, or Barnard, is greeted as Daddy by Dixie, which I think was meant to be, you know, dark humor, but why? Cut it out. We don't need it here. I don't want it here. It's trash. It's creepy. Magnolia gets drunk and strips down to her underwear to try to seduce Bob, even though he's been accused of touching a girl inappropriately. There are some issues, really, even more than the weight stuff, where Dixie's saying some things around like mental health or mental illness, taking the piss out of it, but not in like a way where you're learning something. It's just like further stigmatizing it and making out that it's not normal to have mental illness, it's not common, or it makes you crazy, or it justifies bad behavior, or it makes you weird. And Dixie, also, who's Chinese and adopted, says she's confused about something, and Regina says, I know, baby, that's because you were malnourished in China. And maybe that's meant to be a joke, like, oh, racism's such a bad problem, we should tackle it. But again, cut it out. It's not funny to me. And I do really love what they did with that trans character, where she was talking about her body image and how her identity was so confusing at points, and no one knows that better than her. But the diversity was a little performative there because she didn't turn up in the later episodes, and they introduced lots of characters, so why couldn't she have come in for more episodes? That was like, come on, bring her in more. Why is she just here for a 5-minute scene? I want to see way more of her. And also with Nonnie, she's dating this girl called Dee. Dee doesn't really do anything. In fact, Dee's just there at one point to help Patty and prop her up and help her be better. But then Dee leaves and is made into a bit of a douchebag, a bit of a villain. And then there's this new love interest introduced for Nonnie who we don't care about, and there's barely any development. Like in one episode they just meet and then they're together, and it was like, can we just stick with one love interest for Nonnie? She's not our main character, so she doesn't have loads of screen time, so therefore I don't want to really see like 2 love interests for her, and I'd rather there was development and progression in the current relationship that she does have. Now, body image and EDs, let's talk about that. The body image stuff definitely wasn't as bad as people thought it would be, but there were a lot of issues with it. And I know it is a bit crass and defensive at points, but to be fair, the show does treat all the characters with a level of compassion and sympathy and understanding, so I like that at least. And Alyssa Milano, who plays Coralee, said on Twitter, "We are not shaming Patty, we are addressing through comedy the damage that occurs from fat shaming." And Lauren, the producer writer woman, said Insatiable is really her memoir of an overweight adolescence full of convulsive anger at the way other kids treated her, the kind of rage that makes you want to do dark things. So therefore it is a focus on how bullying could actually turn you into a bully yourself or make you want to do bad things. You know, let out your inner dark fantasies about wanting to hurt other people. That makes sense to me, and I fully respect that. So I get where the show was going. I truly do. I see kind of the trajectory, like I see what they were trying to accomplish, but it doesn't fully hit the mark clearly because there were way too many people upset about it. So there has to be some truth there with people actually not liking it and thinking it was problematic.
Upon first glance, the show is something, and I think people reacted to that. But really, when you get deeper into it, it's about something else, which is what every interaction in our lives is really about.
And Debbie, I know that you put out a statement on Instagram, and you said, I hope fans will wait and watch the show before passing judgment.
The interesting thing about entertainment is we all bring our own histories, our own hurt, our own heartache to anything that we watch, whether that be, you know, a TV show or a piece of art or a song. And really the show, I think, is going to be a conversation instigator. I mean, it already has been, and it hasn't even aired. And to me, anytime these issues that we're dealing with are discussed rather than swept under the carpet, I think it's really important because we really want to eradicate that shame.
And a lot of people were upset about the trailer, which only shows a section of the show, but it was basically implying that Patty's life is so great and she's lost weight, everyone's paying attention to her, and she used to be fat and now she's not. But Alyssa Milano, in an interview to People magazine, said, "The more I think about it, the trailer was feeding into the thematic issue of the show, which is don't judge a book by its cover. People are judging 12 hours of TV from a 1 and 28-second trailer. At the end of the day, the show is a satire about how looks can be deceiving and deals with thematic issues like body image and what it means to win, validation, and filling a void." So I totally get that, because I could see those really deep issues being addressed in the show, and it was done in a really masterful way at points where I was like, that's good, especially with our main character filling a void, needing to find, you know, stimulation everywhere and attention. But in other ways, I was like, this just isn't even like it's targeting issues. Sometimes it's just a bit offensive, or it's not clear where they're going with it or what their actual point is, like what are they trying to say. And I read an article actually that said the reason Patty punched a homeless man is he tried to steal her candy bar. Protecting candy to the point of violence is sort of the jump to light speed of ridiculing your fat characters. It shorthands their shameful appetites, their lack of rationality and discipline, their single-minded prey drive, and their attachment to foods associated with children. And I get that, because one of the reasons Patty wanted to punch the guy is because he tried to take her food. So I get why that's, in a sense, the show not really understanding being overweight, and they're not really being sympathetic or compassionate. It was more than just that, and this critic was really missing the point in some senses, because the guy called her fat, first of all. So if it's any reason to punch someone, that's it. He called her fat, so that would anger you. And I got the feeling that angered her way more than him trying to take the food or share the food. And it was also the fact that 10 seconds earlier, Brick had just rejected her brutally when she thought she liked him, and she was at the height of her body insecurities and being bullied. So it was many factors, and again, that's people judging the show too harshly, and a lot of the actors were clearly passionate about the project and about the themes. Debby Ryan herself, I know, has personal attachments to the topic of body image and things. People were saying the show's bad because it shows that skinny is magic, and in some ways the show does perpetuate this really harmful stereotype, but in a lot of ways it's not, because the point is the trailer shows that, because from Patty's perspective, she thinks skinny is magic, but she learns that she's still just as unhappy, and it did not cure her of her problems to lose weight. In fact, the show kind of takes the piss out of the whole beauty pageant makeover competition over beauty thing. It actually literally makes it into a joke. Patty binged on that sheet cake when she was skinny, and there were multiple points where she was relapsing. She didn't just get over her ED, and at multiple points she says how ugly she feels, that she's still unhappy with her body, she's still checking the fat on her arms, and at one point she's so insecure, thinking Brick will find her unattractive because she's so fat and Magnolia's so much more attractive, and then she'll feel guilty and try and work out for ages to fix it, and then lie and say she hadn't eaten something when she had, and then she'll be dieting and trying to fix it and then binging again. So it was really realistic in that sense. And Stella Rose and Roxy were using her, so to deal with her feelings she went to enter a crawfish eating contest, and then to Bob said, prove your loyalty by beating me in the eating contest. So the show's showing that she still has issues with food and with her self-esteem, even though she's slim now. However, there are other points where I'm like, no, this is fat shaming, or this is idolizing skinny people, or it's sending some weird messages that I don't like. So the show is a bit of a mixed bag. One thing I didn't like is Patty saying that now she'd lost weight, she felt like she could take her new body out for a ride and be intimate, and earlier when she was overweight she was just sat at home stuffing her face and not socializing, which is odd because at any shape and size people can have relationships and desires and explore their sexuality. So that was a bit of an annoying stereotype. I know people were criticizing Patty for wearing a fat suit, and I get it because so often fat suits have been used to take the piss out of fat people, but first of all, when watching it, it wasn't like they were taking the piss out of her fat suit and making it into a joke, but also they needed to show a few scenes from her in the past, and so the actress is slim, she had to wear a fat suit because I don't really know what the other alternative was. What I don't like is when Brick introduced Patty to a damaging weight loss strategy and said this next week is about sweating and starving, so basically not eating and exercising a lot. And what was annoying about that to me is that he looks like he exercises a lot, so he'll probably eat a lot of food because sometimes you get hungry when you exercise. So that was just dumb and definitely like a harmful thing that should not have been there. And a lot of Patty's thoughts around weight and what it means to be skinny are very damaging, but to be fair, it is from Patty's perspective, and she has an ED, so therefore her thoughts would be warped and distorted. So I didn't mind that so much because lots of people were criticizing that, saying it's a problem, but I was like, well, it is Patty. This is how she thinks. This is how she views her body, so it's realistic. Now I want to briefly talk about the humor. At times I was laughing so much. I don't know why people are so harsh in this show and its humor. I thought it was hilarious. Like the scene with Regina wearing a bird costume and Brick trying to practice kissing on fruit. It was so funny and it's so crazy and unexpected and wild at points. How can you not laugh? A lot of people didn't find the show funny, and that's fine because humor is subjective. And there were some really good, funny and interesting twists, like Dixie finding out that Regina isn't actually her mum but had kidnapped her at birth. I don't get why people are so critical of this show and acting like it's the worst show ever on Netflix. I can think of way worse shows. This was kind of fun in a lot of ways. Like, it has a lot of problems, but I would still rewatch it. So, my conclusion overall, how do I feel about this show? I like that all the characters are flawed and not perfect, and if they seem perfect, they turn out not to be perfect. Bob and Coralee, for instance, have this, particularly Coralee, really idealize the family who live nearby, Barnard and his wife, and they're like, wow, they're so amazing, they're so perfect. And then you find out Barnard has loads of issues with his wife, with his relationship, with his parenting, with the way he does his job, everything. And every character is not perfect, and it really contrasts the whole beauty montage and pageant idea, which is again showing us don't judge a book by its cover, and inner beauty is the most important. All the characters have serious issues in their relationships, their marriage is deteriorating with the way they treat their kids, and there's this facade of perfection that isn't real. So I don't know why people are saying the show's pretending to be fake deep and it's actually really superficial and doesn't care about depth, because I think in many ways it actually understands that beauty isn't everything and your personality is more important. The show is dark, it is direct, and I like that about it, and maybe the reason why so many people don't like it is because it makes them uncomfortable and because it's too confronting for them. People either tend to love it or hate it, and as for me, I can see an in-between. I see both sides of the coin, and like I said earlier, the show could have been way better if maybe it had some better writers or people to just patch up where the show was being too crazy, because sometimes it's so crazy that then when there is an emotional scene, you can't really take it seriously or be emotionally invested in it. One of the biggest issues with the show is it's not always sure of its message. Insatiable at points is just taking all these weird detours where it's like, but what's your point here? What are you trying to say? What's your moral? What's your view on this? The show itself is actually having a bit of an identity crisis. It doesn't know what it's supposed to be, and you come out of it going, wait, I can't actually tell if this was good or not. It's meant to be crazy and over the top and cartoonish, so is it actually really good then? Did it achieve this job it had set out to do? But then I'm like, no, because you kind of missed the mark with a few things, so you end up leaving it like, was that good? I don't know. And this story ends up becoming the story of a girl who becomes an actual psychopath in some ways. Like, it gets worse and worse and worse. So I'm not even sure whether I love it or hate it. What I do know is it was very engaging, and I liked how intense it was and how pacey it was, but at other points I was like, wait, that's not good. And the thing is, if you're going to bring up such controversial things, you need to make it clear that you're picking it apart and you're trying to prove the characters wrong. And to be fair, as much as I love the flawed characters in this because I enjoy watching that, I do wish there were more moments where the characters actually had some growth and changed, because it starts to feel a bit repetitive when they're still not really doing any 180 changes and they're doing the same sort of things. Obviously, I can only look at this through my perspective, but I know a lot of plus-size people were saying they found it really offensive and upsetting, but then others were saying it was really accurate and they liked the dark comedy aspect and they didn't find it hurtful at all. So I guess it depends on who you ask. But let me know what you think in the comments, and to make sure you follow me on Instagram and subscribe. Like I said, I actually am uploading videos on Tuesday now, and I'm trying to make that my regular upload day. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys for my next video.